I needed a good introductory article on 2 Timothy to understand some of the historical background. I've come to my favorite site, bible.org. I searched for Introduction to 2 Timothy and I've opened the article by the world-class New Testament scholar Daniel Wallace. Here you can see his article entitled 2 Timothy, Introduction, Argument and Outline. Let's work through some of the main points of what Professor Wallace tells us about 2 Timothy. In the introduction, he has a section entitled Author. He tells us to see the discussion of authorship for the pastoral epistles in the introduction to 1 Timothy. And then he summarizes, although there is great dispute, we believe that the evidence is on the side of Pauline authorship with the help of an amanuensis, perhaps Luke. In other words, Professor Wallace acknowledges that scholars are divided about whether Paul was indeed the author of 2 Timothy, and then concludes that in his expert opinion, the balance of evidence favors regarding Paul as the author. If this seems confusing to you, it's because many scholars deny that Paul wrote this letter that contains his name. For us, as Bible-believing scholars, we take the claim of authorship very seriously. Next, Wallace turns his attention to the date of the letter. He says, and I read, "The date of 2 Timothy is shortly before Paul's death. In many respects, this epistle is his last will and testament. In our view, Paul died in the summer of 64 CE, Common Era. Some scholars would put his death a little bit later, perhaps 66 or 67. We do not know with certainty. Wallace favors 64. He has already gone through a preliminary trial, and the outcome is not promising. This letter should be dated within weeks of Paul's actual death, for Paul's request that Timothy try to come before winter, 421, would hardly have been uttered in the spring, and could not have been written in the late autumn." Turning to the occasion and purpose of the letter, Wallace runs through some of the history of the relationship between Paul and Timothy and their ministry endeavors. He tells us, firstly, Timothy was one of Paul's long-time companions. He had joined the apostle on his second missionary journey, see Acts 16:2, and had been with Paul towards the end of his first Roman imprisonment in Philippians 2. Second, when Paul was released, he took Timothy and Titus with him back to Asia Minor. They left Titus in Crete. Third, they went by way of Ephesus en route to Macedonia. There they encountered false teachers who had virtually taken over the church in Ephesus, just as Paul had predicted they would. Go and see his comments to the Ephesian elders in Acts 20, verses 29 to 30. Fourth, Paul had to press on to Macedonia, but the situation at Ephesus needed help. He left Timothy in charge of the church, giving him instructions to deal with the heretics who had become leaders in the church. Fifth, after spending some time in Philippi as well as Corinth, Paul apparently wintered at Nicopolis on the southeastern Adriatic. Sixth, after the winter of 63-64, Paul attempted to return to Ephesus by way of Troas. There he was rearrested at the instigation of Alexander the metalworker, see 2 Timothy 4 verses 13 to 14. Seventh, he had been brought to trial in Rome and had already had a preliminary hearing. He knows that the end is near. And last, says Wallace, consequently, Paul wishes to write to Timothy before he dies. He is suffering in chains in a cold dungeon. His purpose in writing is really twofold. One, he is lonely and wants Timothy to come to Rome. We see this expressed in 2 Timothy 1 verse 4, 4 verse 9, 4 verse 21. Since only Luke is with him, and no one else could minister to his needs as well as Timothy could. And secondly, since he is about to die, he must encourage Timothy to continue in the work of the ministry. This brings us to the central theme of the letter. This is how Wallace summarizes the theme of 2 Timothy. the theme of this short epistle is bound up with the fact that this is both Paul's last letter and it is to his closest companion. Although the apostle could have dwelt on his own accomplishments, he is more interested in making sure that Timothy is prepared to carry on the work. The double emphasis seen throughout the letter is on endurance and faithfulness to the truth. The theme might be summed up in this way: persevere in the proclamation of the gospel. Wallace now summarizes his understanding of the argument. If you'd like to trace it, you can visit the article on bible.org. It'll help your understanding of the letter for sure. And once he's traced the argument in paragraph form, he summarizes it as a very helpful outline. 2 Timothy 2 verses 1 to 13 fits into section 3 of Wallace's outline, a section that he heads Exhortation to Faithful Endurance. He sees our passage as an exhortation to endurance, and he divides it into 3 subsections: teach others, verses 1 and 2, endure hardship, verses 3 to 7, and remember Jesus Christ, verses 8 to 13. I hope this gives you some background information to make sense of the context within which Paul writes this letter to his close companion Timothy, as he faces imminent death and Timothy faces great challenges to persevere and endure in serving the gospel.